In this video, we'll be running through importing the image we created previously into vWorkspace so that users can access published desktops and applications. So let's get to it and go straight to the lab. Here in the lab we have our management console open and we can drill down into our location, into our data center, and you'll find that under management the gold image that we created has been imported because we've installed the vWorkspace tools in it. For this to be used as a template, it cannot exist inside vWorkspace, so the first thing we'll do is delete that server. You'll also need to delete any hypervisor snapshots as well, otherwise it won't be able to be imported. So we'll delete that server out and we can now start our provisioning. So if we create a new computer group, so we can say we want to provision these computers, there are a lot of choices you have to fill out. So we will call this our default desktop group. It'll be running on Hyper-V. You can select one of the other types of hypervisor or even run it as a physical server. And we would therefore like to choose an administrative account, and the administrative account that I have created is a service account to be used. Scroll up, scroll down, we'll get there in the end. It's my RDSH admin account, which I've made an administrator on any machines that I create, any vWorkspace hosts, by creating a GPO. Check that password is correct. Move on. You can specify here any automated scheduled tasks that you would like to run on the image. So for example, if we were to create a task name, you can then run a predefined set of tasks for that computer. So you can schedule to update the tools, you can copy files around, you can power it on and power it off as a schedule for that desktop group. So when we get to the end, we've created a desktop group, but there are no computers in it and no templates in it. So how do you want to create those computers? So I'm going to create my new computers from a master template, and then I'll be invited to create that master template. So click on finish, and that kicks off the wizard to create the master template. So I'm going to add, let's say 6 computers, or even let's say 8 computers. I then get given some warnings about what I should do to make sure that my template will be acceptable. So not part of the vWorkspace farm, which is why we deleted it, has DHCP enabled, only a single network adapter, all the things that we've been through in the previous videos. I don't have any templates in vWorkspace at the moment, so I will import a template, and my template virtual machine is sitting on this hypervisor server here. So we'll just wait for those to load. And now that they're loaded, we can scroll down and find our gold image that we created, and we can select that. Click on finish. It's detected that we've created our virtual machine with a VHDX type disk, and when we created that in the earlier video, you saw that we ran the PowerShell command to optimize the block size so it didn't decrease performance for our virtual machines. We can therefore select where to deploy the image to. So if we have a bank of hypervisors, we can say only deploy it onto these physical hosts to say which ones to use to direct our performance, or if it's the same image going to all hosts, we can just select go to all hosts. And it merely ticks the tick boxes for us. Notice that there is a button up here to change the way that our load will be distributed. Will it just be an equal distribution based on free space? How will it distribute the virtual machines when it provisions them? So this will be using our load balancing algorithm that we've assigned to the physical host. What would you like to call your virtual machines that are created? So it takes the name of the group that we're creating, which is default desktop. But I'm going to call mine vWork hyphen and then 3 digits. So it'll start at vWork hyphen 001, go to vWork hyphen 002, etc. You can then make changes to the operating system. So I have created a set of customizations that we can use. If I take you through this wizard now, you give it a name, you say what platform the customizations are going to be used for. You can import your own XML file if you're doing a full sysprep, your own unattended XML file if you're doing a full sysprep. No need if you're using the instant provisioning feature of vWorkspace. This will be optimized for Windows Server 2012 because we're doing RDSH. What registration settings you'd like to use, what time zone to associate the image with. You can specify a product key if you need to. I'm using 2012 R2 and I'm running data center on the hypervisor, so it auto registers, licenses my operating system. What type of customizations would you like to run? And we're configured to use instant provisioning because we have the instant provisioning client in, but if you prefer you can run a full sysprep. The local administrator password, no, as with sysprep, this will only set if the administrator password in the virtual machine is blank. If you've set any password there, then this won't overwrite it. Do I want to add the virtual machine to my domain? For the purposes of the lab, I'm just using the domain admin account, but you would want to set a proper service account to do that, that only has rights to our computers to the domain. And I have chosen my Active Directory path to place my newly created virtual machines in. So it's very simple, you just drill down and say where you'd like the machines accounts to be created. Within the image, do you want to enable or disable the firewall? If you enable it, do make sure those ports are allowed access. Notice that Quest best practice default position is to disable your firewall. Standard stuff for setting up an operating system. You can run once commands, and then interestingly you can put an identification string into the registry so that you can identify which template was used to create the server. So if you update this each time and use that as a set of customizations and redeploy your virtual machines, if you're doing desktops rather than RDSH servers, you can look in the registry and see which template the virtual machine was created from. So we select our customizations at build time. We can then either accept the values that are on the hypervisor, or we can select our own values. Interestingly, you can not change the quantity of CPUs here. So do know that that needs to be set on your template. But if I wanted to, for example, change the amount of memory, so my template at the moment is set with a static 4 gig because it's a template, but I can use dynamic memory, and I can say I'll give it 20. In fact, I'd better use 512 meg because one of my servers doesn't have a lot of RAM, and I'll let that go up to 64 gig of RAM and say that it can expand up. So we'll set dynamic memory, and we'll say, well, use this as the network card. So you can change these settings, how video will work, how RAM will work, what the priority is for memory, and how your network adapters will work. Then you get to say when you want to create the computers. So for all you busy admins out there, you can set the computers to be created during the day, but actually set the command to run out of hours so that you're not placing stress on the servers. So this is where it's going to place my volumes, my virtual machines. It will place them on these volumes. So if I click on finish there, Quest will go away, notify the connection broker, and start creating the virtual machines for me. My default desktop provisioning group is created. I get to see what's happening down below. If I select the session host, I can then see what's happening on each session host, and I can even look at a log of the task to see what's going on. So at the moment it's copying the parent VHD across, it's copied enough to start booting the machines. Those machines will then be running instant provisioning, vWorkspace's own version of sysprep. As the machines are provisioned and initialized, then a management group will be created. As you saw when we were creating the virtual machines, it wanted to place the virtual machine on the C drive of each of my hypervisor hosts. If we look at the virtualization hosts, then we can see by looking at the properties that whilst my hosts have multiple disks, I have said only to place the virtual machines on the C drive. I could have placed them anywhere. So it will copy. This is where it will copy template disks to. So D data in the case of this server, and it will place the virtual machines themselves on the C drive. If we access the drives of my hypervisor, on my C drive you'll notice that I have a folder created called Quest vWorkspace VMs, and inside there my virtual machines are being created. So it's created the first 3 virtual machines there. And if I were to look at the D drive, you'll see that a similar situation exists. But on my D drive, whilst the folder is created, you'll now see inside there the one template disk that all of my virtual machines will be created for on that hypervisor. So it creates a folder called parent VHDs, and inside that folder resides my disk, so 13 gig disk. That will still be copying across in the background, so my image will currently be locked at the moment, my template image, and will be freed to be updated once it's been copied to all of the servers. If we go back to the provisioning side of things, you can see that the servers are still being provisioned, still being created, and we'll come back when that's finished. As you can see, the servers are all up and running, and the load is spread between my physical hosts. So I have 4 computers running on DC1 and 5 computers running on Hyper-V 02. So it's distributed the load. Slightly more load it's detecting as being on DC1, possibly because of the RAM that's being used inside the virtual machines. If we visit each virtual machine, here's vWork001, and you'll notice it is assumed that identity, and we also have vWork004 running off the same image, which is assumed that identity. Creates a folder for you. The folder itself is no other use other than for you to group your machines together, whereas the provisioning folder, the provisioning group, is important because it will say that's the type of image. Generally it will say that's the type of image that will be assigned to those virtual machines. So you can go through and change provisioning settings later if you wish. Looking up at the locations level, we can look at the properties. There are some settings here that are pertinent to our new servers. So communication settings is for the brokers, health and the brokers check. if a user logs off, will it automatically log them off if only these processes are running? So it will force a log off when, so you don't get hung sessions. Should they reconnect to an existing session? Should they get a new session? In terms of hypercache, very important for us, do we want to be using hypercache? This is where it takes the template, the single template, and loads it into the RAM onto the physical host and does reads from RAM, so reads become far faster. Very important in the VDI scenario because that's where most of your IOPS are. By default, 800 meg assigned. That's usually enough to get the OS up and running. You can feel free to increase that amount if you like, to hold more of the disk, so to hold the applications themselves in RAM as well. Obviously you're not going to hold the whole disk there, but clearly a lot of the disk isn't used being read at the same time. How often do you purge the RAM to bring in other data? Hyper deploy is what we're doing to deploy our virtual machines. As I showed you earlier, the gold image gets copied to each physical host. That can take up quite a bit of bandwidth. By default, it's set to only do 10 meg a second to copy that image across to the physical host. So it shouldn't be too intrusive, it shouldn't stop users working because it's not really taken across the data that fast, and therefore won't really spin the disks that fast either because the network will be limiting the transfer. If you take it up to unlimited, the image will get across a lot quicker, but of course the disk will spin faster, and vice versa. You can take it down if you like. How much space should we consider means that the disks are overcommitted? Next one, quite important, especially in VDI. Do you want to, if you're going to be destroying the virtual machine images, have vWorkspace manage your MAC address pool and even reuse those MAC addresses so that you don't get MAC address exhaustion? Or what happens a lot in VDI scenarios is DHCP getting filled up with old MAC addresses. You can set your auto size settings, optimize the environment, some more, specify an account to use when removing computers from Active Directory, and if we have assigned permissions under a role-based access control model, they'll appear here. So those are the settings up at the locations node. The next set of pertinent settings are for each virtual machine. So if we right click one of the virtual machines, we can look at the properties for that virtual machine itself. Name of the machine, what it's doing inside vWorkspace, so all of these will be session hosts. Do I want to put them into a folder? As you can see, it's for display purposes only, but you can organize the servers how you will. How should I load balance connections to the individual host? So we did in a previous video go through configuring your own rules so that you can apply your own counters to say when you consider load to be full. So this one here is a default RD session host. Just says simply if there's 100 users, then consider it full. If we wanted to look at the other rules, we would come down to our load balancing node down here, and then we can view and edit the rules themselves. Do you want to use the default exclusion list that we saw earlier? Do you want to set an IP address for NAT scenarios? Do you want to optimize performance for virtual RAM and CPU? As you can see, Knowledge Base Article 70253, CPU and memory optimizations aren't available for all platforms, specifically disabled for x64-bit server operating systems, which have native optimizations for these, which you can set through GPOs. We can optimize the experience. Are you using any sort of form of traffic shaping over your WAN? We can enable EOP audio optimizations for audio. EOP audio, VoIP compression, adaptive buffering, so it optimizes the experience for VoIP essentially, so link and such like. Do we need to assign virtual IPs to individual clients? So if they're using a piece of software that is licensed per IP address, or needs to see the traffic for each user coming from an individual IP address, do we need to enable that feature? If we're not using concurrent user licensing, how do we want to assign licenses based on features? So that's how you configure each of the servers and change their settings. Hope that's been useful for you. In the next video, we'll look at assigning applications and desktops to users. See you soon.